Okay, thanks. A very good evening to everyone who's attending this session. My name is Geetha Ramaswami. I am Program Manager at SeasonWatch, which is a citizen science project monitoring how trees change with the seasons and how climate change is reflected in that. More about this project later in this presentation. I would like to start by firstly thanking NPTEL to give me this opportunity to speak to you all about this very interesting topic about how we can track climate change through trees. I'll just take a minute to start presenting my screen. So to begin, how can we track climate change through trees? In this slide, the first picture that you see is that of a common crow butterfly. Butterflies are very iconic. They are colorful, they are everywhere, and they also go through a very intricate and complicated life cycle. They start off as caterpillars, they molt a whole bunch of times, they grow bigger in size. The whole time they're voraciously eating plants. And at the end of this caterpillar, you find a pupa. A pupa is where the caterpillar basically rearranges itself and later on emerges as a butterfly. If you live in peninsular India, you might have also seen in the months of October and November, if you go outdoors, masses of these common crow butterflies migrating in a single direction together, lots of them together. The second picture in this particular slide is that of the pied cuckoo. The pied cuckoo finds a lot of mention in folklores across India as the harbinger of the monsoon. So if you hear a pied cuckoo, you can rest assured that the monsoon is going to follow very soon. And as you go further north, as and when the pied cuckoo starts getting noticed by people, you see that the monsoon also follows pretty close by. The third picture on the screen is that of the ghost tree. This is a tree which you find in dry deciduous forests of India. It's very beautiful tree to look at. It has a stark white colored bark, and that's why it's called a ghost tree. The ghost tree begins its life as a tiny seed. It germinates into a seedling, becomes a sapling, and in a dry forest environment, there are lots of things that can damage a sapling. There is trampling by large herbivores like elephants. There could be fires. There could be droughts that could be killing off saplings above the ground. And a tree like the ghost tree withstands all of these for decades and then grows up into a tall, beautiful, mighty, stately tree. And then onwards, once it's an adult, it starts producing flowers and fruits. And from the fruits arise seeds that begin this whole cycle again. Now, why I'm talking about these things is because the study of the cyclical changes that occur in organisms, ranging all the way from invertebrates to vertebrates to trees, is known as phenology. I'll be using this word quite a bit throughout the presentation. And the life cycle of trees, starting from seeds to adult, and the changes that occur in trees seasonally is also called as phenology. And tree phenology is an amazing indicator of the season and of the larger climatic, of the larger climate as well. And how is this? Most of our understanding about tree phenology and the link with climate actually comes from temperate regions. Now, temperate regions, because there is a very, very cold winter season, which is not conducive for vegetative growth in trees, marks a period in the life cycle of a tree where it can't grow. So there's a very marked growing period in the life cycles of trees in temperate regions. And this is known as the temperate growing season. And it's marked by the seasons that we call spring and autumn. Spring is when the vegetative part of the tree resumes from its deciduous state, from its state of no leaves at all, to putting out these vegetative buds that eventually grow and mature into mature leaves, do a whole bunch of photosynthesis through the summer, and then in the autumn season, these leaves are dropped again to prepare for the winter, where having green photosynthesizing leaves might be very costly to maintain for a tree. So such kind of phenology is highly sensitive to temperature. So trees can sense that spring has set in by the number of accumulated days where it's been a particular temperature, and they can sense that autumn has set in, and they respond by either putting out vegetative buds or changing color of the leaves and dropping the leaves. And this is very stark in the temperate regions. So because of the high sensitivity of these plants to temperature in the temperate regions, we also see that there's a very quick response to larger changes like climate change, which is resulting in higher ambient temperatures, warming which is earlier than usual, and this is reflected in how trees and those things that are dependent on trees for their life cycle change. Let's quickly look at an example. So in the temperate region, there is a broad-leafed tree called the pedunculate oak. And like many species of temperate trees, the pedunculate oak also puts out vegetative buds, which is the buds of the leaves, when the spring season sets in. Now, as soon as these buds are put out, there are these little winter moth larvae, the caterpillar of winter moth, which hatch out at the same time and consume these newly emerged buds of the pedunculate oak. Eating these winter moth larvae are birds, passerine birds such as Paris major, which also nest around the same time that the winter moth larvae emerge. Now, what is happening with climate change is that the spring season or the growing season is setting in earlier, much earlier, say 10 to 15 days earlier than it was historically known. So what consequences does it have for this food chain now? So we know now that as the pedunculate oak has started putting out its vegetative buds earlier, so have the winter moth larvae started emerging earlier. So the phenology of the pedunculate oak and the winter moth has sort of synchronized in response to climate change. However, a larger animal like the bird that you see here cannot quite so easily shift its life cycle to match what is going on around it. So while the bird continues to nest at the same time, the winter moth larvae are not larvae anymore when the birds nest, and there is a possible threat that they are actually going hungry. The chicks of these birds are actually going hungry. So we see here that in temperate regions, trees are an amazing indicator of what is happening in the larger climate. But this is in the temperate region where there's a distinct growing season, and you can clearly see trees responding to something like this growing season. What happens on the other hand in the tropics where we live is that it's warm through the year, and there's hardly any duration in the year that we can distinctly call as the growing season. So in response to this always conducive sort of environment in the tropics, trees often have a huge diversity of strategies, phenological strategies. Trees could be producing fruits throughout the year without any season. There could be some tree species which choose to remain evergreen, some which may be deciduous, which is they drop their leaves only in certain times of the year, but not quite the same as what happens in the temperate regions and when they shed their leaves, the trees there shed their leaves. Phenology can also be represented as multiple flowering cycles, multiple fruiting cycles, gap years in flowering and fruiting, and so on. So this mind-boggling diversity is also different at the level of the population. The same species could be exhibiting different types of phenology depending on where it's present. Groups of species in a community could be displaying completely different phenology even though they're all present in the same place. The similar types of communities might behave differently because they're present in different geographical regions. Now, a little bit of understanding is there about what affects the phenology of tropical tree species, and temperature, precipitation, and day length are at the top of the factors that could be affecting tropical tree phenology. However, to try and understand how climate change is affecting tropical tree phenology, and whether actually it can be used as an indicator of larger climatic changes, we need information data on tropical tree species at a very large scale and over very long periods of time. The long period of time is covered very well in temperate regions because there are systematic records of phenology for economically, culturally important tree species over very long periods of time, and that sort of serves as a benchmark to compare current changes against. But most of the tropics, and especially in India, long-term and large-scale data on plant phenology are very hard to come by. And this is sort of a stumbling block in our understanding of how the larger climate change is affecting biodiversity as a whole. Now, it's not like there's absolutely no information. There are actually scientific studies that have been conducted throughout India, and these little red dots on the map are basically tree phenology study sites in the past few decades or so. The size of the dot indicates the duration of the study. And most studies are usually 2 to 5 years in length, with very few studies actually having information for more than a decade. But to detect the kind of changes that climate causes in plants, we need that scale of information. We need decadal or more larger scales of information. So how does one surmount this big, huge knowledge gap and also sort of build upon our understanding, better understanding of climate change and how that affects trees? This is where citizen science comes in. This is because scientists are usually involved in more intensive, localized understanding, but citizen science presents the opportunity of going large scale. So just a little bit of a detour here, just to know what is citizen science. Citizen science is basically scientific research conducted by non-professional scientists. And the need for citizen science arises when scientific knowledge production is required at very large scale. And citizens who are not practicing scientists can also easily contribute to production of scientific knowledge by following the protocol and by understanding the question and following the protocol that's required for the citizen science project. The other great thing about something like citizen science is that it is responsive to citizen needs, which means that people can actually think of a need that they have, a scientific problem that they have, and to address it, they can collect information on their own. So this is making science a little bit more open, a little bit more accessible to citizens at large. But why would we require something like citizen science, and why is it useful for studying questions like phenology at the scale of the country? So I'll quickly just give you a couple of examples of how citizen science projects achieve this kind of scale. So on top over here is a screenshot of this citizen science program called iNaturalist. And what you see here are observations of the Bengal monitor lizard that various people who have registered with this site contribute on the site. And this over here is sort of a distribution map for this particular species. So you can see that, something like this particular species, the distribution of the species can now be understood at the scale of the entire country simply by contributing information about it through a citizen science portal. The other great thing about citizen science is that when you engage with something continually, it has the potential for garnering information over the long term. And long-term data is always great for studying things like seasonality. So here's another example from eBird. eBird is a portal where you can submit observations of birds that you see in your locality. And if you see here, these are species of birds. And here's the year going from January to December. And the green bars and the thickness of the green bars sort of indicates when the species was most observed in lists that people have submitted on birds. So you can see that for this particular species, there is a seasonality where it was observed in some part of the year, but not at others, and then again over some other part of the year. So citizen science is great for studying things like seasonality. So why not also implement it for plants, to study plant seasonality? And this is not a new idea. citizen scientists have been collecting information on plant phenology for very long periods of time. In the city of Kyoto in Japan, where this culturally important species, the cherry tree, blossoms, it's a spectacle to behold, and it's the harbinger of the spring season or the growing season in that region. And as such, this species finds a lot of cultural importance in Japan and has therefore been documented for centuries. Yes, literally centuries. 1200 years ago, the first documentation of the cherry tree blossoming in the city of Kyoto has been recorded. And this record started with things like princely records, the records of in the courts of kings, and this eventually became a more systematized scientific understanding of when cherry trees were blossoming in this city of Kyoto. So this very interesting graph shows that from about 880 to the beginning of the 1900s, cherry trees in Kyoto roughly bloom between the 10th and the 20th of April every year. But after the onset of the Industrial Revolution, until the present, this average date of blooming has actually reduced. It's become earlier, between the 1st and the 10th of April. Now, the pattern of this phenology is so tractable that scientists, Iono and Kazui, they have actually used this shift in phenology to back calculate the kind of climate that would have been present 1200 years ago. So this particular tree, because of this long-term trends of flowering in this particular tree, we are now able to understand how climate has affected phenology, firstly, and secondly, also what kind of climate was there in the past. The other thing that citizen scientists can do that regular scientists can't is that they can contribute information over very large spatial scales, over very large area. And this particular map is from the USA National Phenology Network. And what you see here, the colors are basically the spring leaf index anomaly, which is basically the date of emergence of leaves on species of plants as of 17 September 2020 compared to a long-term average, a historical average. So all of the southeastern part of the United States this year experienced leaf out in the spring season in plants 20 days earlier than usual. And all of the northwestern part of the United States experienced leaf out 20 days later than usual in the spring. So this magnitude of information is possible only because the USA National Phenology Network has a large contribution from citizen scientists based across the countries who contribute information to data centers. So now having information at this large scale also helps us understand how climate change affects these processes at that scale. So the 20 days early in the future could be then determined to be caused by higher ambient temperatures or some alteration in the precipitation regime, etc. And this provides us valuable information on how phenology is changing over very large scales. So do we have an equivalent in India? And I'm here to tell you that yes, we do. We have a citizen science project called SeasonWatch, which is aimed at understanding the phenology of widespread, easily found, common tropical trees that are found across the country. And this project is 10 years old. It started in 2010. And over the past 10 years, we have had contributions on more than 87,000 trees, more than 4 lakh observations on more than 87,000 trees by more than 1,000 interested individuals. Individuals basically who are interested in contributing information, are interested in trees, etc. And from 900 and thousands of students who are part of more than 900 schools from across the country. If you see these little blurbs, these indicate the locations of trees that have been observed from across the country. And a large mass of these trees are actually located in the state of Kerala. Users generally contribute information through our website, which is www.seasonwatch.in. Instructions on how you can become a participant are available at this website, or through our freely downloadable Android app, freely downloadable from Google Store, which you can have it on your phone and use it on the go. What species do we monitor? We have 130 plus tree species which are common, widespread. People can generally easily recognize them because they're locally abundant or they find mention in cultural practices. And this is the most favorite of all trees across India, the mango. On the left over here is just a very zoomed in picture of the inflorescence. We have the jamun, which is another favorite tree. If you look, these are typically summer fruits, and the flowers arise just before the summer fruits happen. It's a very beloved summer tree across India. I'm sure you have all seen it in your neighborhood. We have some other tree species that put on a spectacular show just before they, go all in and make fruits for the growing season that is coming up post-monsoon. So on the left over here is the red silk cotton tree, or Bombax ceiba. And it's spectacular because when it flowers, there are typically no leaves and it's only just the flowers. And it's usually covered in a mass of birds and pollinators. All pollinators who have come for the nectar and birds who have come to eat the pollinators. So it's a hub of activity when it's in flower, and it's a huge stately tree, spectacular to look at when it's flowering. This tree on the right is the Indian laburnum tree, or Cassia fistula, also puts on a spectacular show. It's called the golden showers tree, obviously for very obvious reasons. Again, a tree which typically does not have any leaves when it's flowering. So it's a big tree covered in yellow blossoms which are drooping down like chandeliers. It's lovely to look at. Also finds a lot of mention in our cultural practices. More about that coming up. We have trees that are part of our culture. On the left is a very beloved tree which people from Kerala find the most easy to observe for season watch, and this is the jackfruit with very nondescript flowers but very large fruits, finding lots of mention in cuisine. On the right is the peepal tree, Ficus religiosa. Now, a peepal tree is typically a tree that people revere. They protect a peepal tree. So even though it doesn't produce fruits that people can use, the peepal tree, however, would be a staple in a village corner or near a temple under which people would gather and talk. And therefore, the peepal tree is another beloved, culturally beloved tree. So these are species that, these are just some of the species that we've chosen from a list, from several hundreds of tree species that are actually found in India, because these are easily recognizable and easily accessible by people across the country. Now, once you have a tree, what do people do with it? How can they contribute information that eventually feeds into understanding tree seasonality and eventually to something like climate change? What we typically do is we have training sessions for organizations or institutions that want to do this at a larger scale locally. And what we typically do is we train them how to observe a tree. And I'll quickly go through how you can also observe a tree. So this particular tree is a very beautiful native tree called Butea monosperma, or flame of the forest. This is not the same as the silk cotton, that's a different tree. This tree, again, it's found very commonly in the dry deciduous forests of India, and it has a very apt name because during the deciduous season, most trees are leafless, and then this tree puts out flowers, and it really does look like a flame in the forest because the scarlet flowers are really beautiful to look at. So what does one do when one sees a tree like this? One quickly makes an assessment of what types of leaves, flowers, and fruits the tree has. In order to do so, we have to imagine that actually this tree is a circle and cut it into thirds like a pizza. And in every third, we make an assessment of how many new mature dying leaves are there, how many buds and open flowers are there, and how many ripe and unripe fruits are there. And when I say how many, it's very simple. If you don't find that phenophase, which is leaf, flower, and fruit, if you don't find that phenophase, you mark it as none. But if you find a phenophase only in a third of the canopy, you mark it as few. But if you find the phenophase in more than a third part of the canopy, you mark it as many. So for instance, in this particular example, there are actually no new leaves, mature leaves, or dying leaves. There are many buds and many flowers that you can see, but there are no fruits, either unripe or ripe. So this is a really easy observation to make, and once one is used to observing a tree, it takes only a couple of minutes to actually make an observation like this. But this kind of observation collected over long periods of time across the country are invaluable in understanding trees' response to seasons. So let's quickly look at what kind of data we have at SeasonWatch. Firstly, who contributes? As I mentioned before, interested individuals and schools contribute information to SeasonWatch, and we have seen a steady increase in the number of schools and individuals that contribute information in the roughly 10-year time period that SeasonWatch has been around. But the patterns in which data comes in are very interesting. If you look at the number of observations as a whole, and also how many observations are contributed by a contributor, then Kerala tops the list with up to 316 observations on average per contributor, and this is a very large number. So roughly 85% of all data that comes to SeasonWatch is actually coming from the state of Kerala. So this is followed by Andhra Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Meghalaya. And although there is a substantial amount of observations per contributor, it doesn't really match what Kerala shows, the kind of data that's coming in from Kerala. So the data that comes in also indicates which species are the most easy to observe, most accessible, and most favorite of people. So the top 4 species that people like to observe are Artocarpus heterophyllus, which is jackfruit, mango, tamarind, and amla. These are the 4 top species. And what you see here is an indication of the number of times a repeat observation has been performed for SeasonWatch. So in SeasonWatch, you can register a tree and choose to monitor it again and again every week. So these are the type of, these are repeat observations made on more than 1900 registered jackfruit trees, more than 45,000 observations on more than 1900 mango trees, and so on. Again, so culturally important species are more likely to get noticed and more likely to be observed by people. So one would imagine that something as common as a mango tree, which is present everywhere, everyone knows what a mango tree is, it should be fairly easy to know the seasonal phenology of something like a mango tree. However, there's a lot of variation in mango phenology with latitude in the country, and also there's also seasonal variation. And depending on what source you refer to, let's say a flora or herbarium record, you might find different records for the phenology of tree species. So if you look at how mango phenology changes over time, with the SeasonWatch data, starting from 2014 to 2019, we've been able to sort of get a nice description of the change in the phenology of mango. So the light gray is the phenophase leaf, the dark gray is flower, and the black is fruit. And you can see that there's a peak in flowering between Feb and March, followed by a peak in fruiting between March and June. This might be a little bit surprising because most people associate mango fruits with peak summer, which is June to end of May to end of July. And this little shift that you see to the left is because most of this data is coming from Kerala. And in Kerala, the patterns of fruiting are much earlier than the rest of the country. And we were also able to detect this by doing an India-wide assessment. So what we did between December 2018 and September 2019 was host a series of BioBlitz events. A BioBlitz event is basically an event where people go out en masse and collect a particular type of information. So our BioBlitz events basically were collecting phenology information for species that you find across India. So on the same 3 or 4 days in December, March, June, and September, people went out, recorded phenology, and fed it back into our database. And we were able to see the latitudinal patterns in fruiting for a species like mango. So if you see in December 2018, the gray dots here represent all trees that were recorded through all the 4 bioblitzes, and the yellow dots represent trees which were fruiting. So December 2018, trees were fruiting in southern India. By March, the fruiting had spread all over peninsular India. By June, the fruiting had spread all over India. And by September back, the fruiting trees were now confined only to the southernmost tip of India. So this was a great way to finally sort of demonstrate that there's a latitudinal pattern in the phenology for the same species, mango. But why there is a variation in the tree phenology is something that we are yet to explore. Is it because of temperature variability? Is it because peninsular India experiences a very different type of seasonality than northern India and eastern India? Is it because of that? Now, these things are things that we have to still explore. Now, like I mentioned, for the temperate tree species, there's a lot of data, actual data over decadal or more time scales, where trees have been observed, and that forms sort of like a baseline against which we can compare the phenology that is happening today. This comparison helps us determine that the change that we see in the phenology of trees is likely because of things like climate change. However, like I mentioned, in India, we don't have those kinds of data baselines. So we were curious as to whether we could use some other type of baselines to sort of compare against current phenological patterns. And the baselines that we used were cultural references. So very favorite story of ours to tell is that of this Cassia fistula, or the Indian laburnum, or the golden shower tree. This tree finds cultural mention in Kerala because it is associated with the New Year festival, which is Vishu, that typically happens every year between the 13th and 15th of April. This date is more or less static. And there was a time when the flowers of the Indian laburnum were copious around this time, and people used to use this for the celebrations of the Vishu festival. However, over the past decade or so, people have noticed that actually the amount of the quantity of flowering that happens around Vishu is less, and sometimes people don't even find these flowers around Vishu time, and they have to resort to buying plastic flowers. So that is culturally something very heartbreaking for people who are used to using the fresh live flowers from the trees for the celebration. So we wanted to sort of test this intuition that people of Kerala had using the data that they had contributed to SeasonWatch. And what we did was we looked at the flowering phenology of all the trees, all the cassia trees recorded from Kerala between 2014 and 2019, and looked at the average flowering pattern. So this particular vertical gray line indicates the timing of Vishu every year, which is between 14th and 15th week of the year. The light gray line indicates the proportion of trees that were indicated as having flowers, few or many, right? So this particular thing indicates that pretty much throughout the year, there were flowering trees in the population of flowering tree of cassia trees in Kerala. And this is again aberrant because people associate a very sharp seasonality with the flowering in cassia trees, and that about 40% of the population was flowering throughout the year was something very unusual. But what about the peak flowering So we considered trees which had many flowers as indication of peak flowering in cassia, and we plotted that. That's the black line over here, and we see that the peak in like high flowering was actually just a little bit before the usual typical Vishu date. So it is very likely that what people were observing, that they were not able to get this particular flower of this particular species at a particular time, was actually quite a valid thing. And that there seems to be some indication that flowering in this particular species is a little bit aberrant from what was known. So we basically used a cultural reference, cultural festival reference, to understand whether the phenology of a species had shifted or not. So we thought that this is a great stand-in for other species as well. There is a species like the flame of the forest, which is associated with festivals in North India. The neem tree, the flowers of which are associated with festivals in South India, and mahua, which is a very important non-timber forest product and of great cultural importance to people in central India. And from anecdotally, we are kind of getting the idea that the flowering in these species has also become slightly aberrant over time. But we still don't have enough information about these trees from SeasonWatch to be able to conclude these things. So I would like to wrap up this talk over here by concluding that long-term observation of trees over very large scales can help us understand how the larger climate is affecting living things. We haven't even started exploring how the food chains downstream of tropical trees are affected because of aberrant flowering and fruiting in these particular species. And ecologically, these questions are very important because eventually humans are also dependent on the flowers and fruits and leaves of various trees. And if that's going to shift quite a bit, then we had better be aware of how that's shifting. So just to end this talk, I would like to thank a whole bunch of people who are associated with SeasonWatch, and also all of our citizen scientists who contributed data tirelessly over 10 years of time for us to be able to come to these conclusions, put these things together. This information is also available as a preprint on bioRxiv, so I would encourage you to all go and look at it. Data collected by Season Watchers is open access, and you can write to Season Watch and we will give you the data if you want to play around with it and look at patterns and explore how climate change affects tree species in India. So thank you, thanks a lot. And I will now take questions. I don't see any queries in the live session, the sheet, responses sheet. So maybe I can request Shibalaji to please enable the chat so that people can send in queries over chat. Thanks. And I think you will have to also read back the queries to me if. All right. Sorry, I can't view the chat. Can you, maybe you could read the queries that are coming in, if there are any queries? Okay, sorry. I don't see any comments. Okay, so Parth has written something. Hi. Hi, Parth. You can please write your query. Right. Parth, you can join. Okay, Parth is from Surat and he wants to join Season Watch. So, for all those who are interested to contribute to Season Watch, it's very simple. You can visit the Season Watch website, which is www.seasonwatch.in, and there's a little register button on the side. You can click on that and fill in the registration details and register yourself with Season Watch. Once you're registered, you can make observations on the website itself. Actually, you can do both these things on our Android app as well. So once you register, the process is very simple. You need to register a tree which is in your locality with Season Watch and just observe it every week using the 1/3 rule that I just spoke about in the presentation. You can also make one-time observations using our casual observation feature, and all of this data together contributes to our understanding of tropical tree species. I hope that answers your question, Parth. If anyone else has questions, please do type in. Vijayanagaram Dhanush is asking if there are any government volunteering agency where we can volunteer. I'm not sure I understand that question. You mean for studying phenology or for volunteering with the Season Watch project? So I'm not aware of any government agencies where you can volunteer to study phenology. I'm not aware of that. If anyone else on this list is, you can please share details. If you want to contribute to Season Watch, you can simply register with Season Watch and start contributing. Okay. Dhanush is asking whether volunteering with Season Watch is possible. Actually, rather than volunteering, I would request you to actually contribute data. That's very valuable for the program. So, but right now we don't have any other types of volunteering opportunities in Season Watch. Okay, so Deepa has written from Tamil Nadu. She wishes to contribute data from trees from her garden, and how can she do that? So, Deepa, firstly, I would ask you to go through the list of tree species that are there in Season Watch. You can go visit the website, and the list of species is available there. You can match that against the trees that are there in your garden. In Tamil Nadu, I would expect several of our species would be likely there in your garden. Um, uh, yeah, so I'm thinking, sorry, I can only recall the scientific names. I can't remember the common names for any of these species, but you can please go and have a look at that list. If you see trees that are there in your garden, in our list, you can register with Season Watch, register that tree with Season Watch, and start observing, making observations using either the website or our Android app. So what I can do is I can maybe, yeah. So, I mean, the best would be to visit the website and go through the steps. It's all mentioned over there. Right. So on our species list, we have many flowering trees that we typically find in urban gardens. Plants like the temple tree, Plumeria rubra, or the night blooming jasmine, or the scholar's tree or devil's tree. These things are commonly found in gardens across India, and you would be able to, these species are also there on our list. Thanks, Deepa, for that question. For others with queries, please go ahead and you can please type in the chat. I'll be happy to respond to any other queries. In the meantime, I would also encourage you all to look outside your window, and if you have trees outside your window, just make a note of what they are doing. Do they have flowers? Do they have fruits? Is it something that you have noticed ever before? That's a great way to start. The other interesting thing about trees is that they attract a lot of insects, all kinds of animals, birds, and they're a great hub to look at biodiversity in general. So, yeah, looking at a tree is a great thing. So, okay, I think no more queries are coming in. Okay, I have some queries here now on the live session queries. I'll just quickly read this. Sunita from Karimnagar has written, we would like to know parameters taken into consideration for this study. So parameters taken into consideration are basically the phenophase, that is the response, basically. Phenophase is leaf, flower, and fruit. And the only thing we have looked at till now is how that changes with time, on average, over the past 6 years. But in the future, we also plan to include other parameters like temperature, precipitation, other types of factors that are likely to influence the phenophase of the tree. So yeah, so at present only time, but in the future all kinds of environmental factors. Oh, Parth is saying that he'll start observing neem tree by today. Thanks, Parth. That's great. Please do. Dhanush is saying, I don't know why, but there is a tree that is actually shedding its leaves during this time. That okay, so typically in peninsula, if you live in peninsular India, in the states of Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, uh, Karnataka, the dry season, or the season where less than average yearly rainfall happens, is typically starting now. So November to April is when less than average amount of rainfall will happen. And this season is also typically associated with leaves shedding from trees. So if this is something that you have not observed earlier but is happening now, that's a great observation, and you should make a record of that. But if it happens on average, then it's just the time when leaves are shed. If you think that's unusual, do make a note of this. Okay, Deepa is saying the comparison with the pizza. Sorry. So, okay, just to clarify, this is the protocol that we use to quantify the amount of leaves, flowers, and fruits in SeasonWatch. So, because the canopy of a tree is so heterogeneous, it's very weird. We would, to standardize how everyone observes the phenophase, we ask them to imagine actually the canopy of the tree as a circle, divided into thirds. mentally divide it into thirds. And then in each of those thirds, observe what phenophase is present and how much of it is present based on the number of thirds in which it is present. So if you don't see it at all in any of the thirds, then you mark it as none. If you see it only in one of the thirds, then you mark it as few. If you see it in more than one of the thirds, which is one third or more than one third of the tree canopy, then you mark it as many. So when you mark something as many, it sort of indicates a peak in that particular phenophase, like peak flowering or peak fruiting in that particular in the canopy of that tree. So this is just to ensure that everyone is measuring the phenophases the same way. There is a standardized protocol. I hope that answers your question. We have Sharat Mohanan who has, he has not, sorry, from Idiki, but who has not written a question. Okay. If you have any other queries about tree phenology, I'll be happy to answer that as well. I think there are no more queries either on the sheet or on the YouTube channel. Thanks Deepa for your comment and thanks for your query. So I guess if there are no more queries, we could end this session. I would like to thank NPTEL once again for inviting me to give this talk. It was great pleasure giving this talk and also interacting with the audience. Thanks a lot. Yes, there are no more queries on the sheet. I have already addressed the questions that are there on the sheet. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.